In the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of tradition echo through marble halls, a decision was being made that would send shockwaves through the British establishment. Prince Harry, the spare heir who had already shaken the monarchy to its core, was about to make another choice that would leave royal experts speechless and security professionals questioning everything they thought they knew about protecting the royal family. This wasn't just about bodyguards or bulletproof cars. This was about a prince who dared to rewrite the rules of royal protection in a way that no one, not even his own family, could have predicted. What started as a simple security arrangement would become the most controversial royal decision since his departure from official duties, leaving commentators scrambling to understand how the rebel prince had once again managed to surprise everyone. The story you're about to discover reveals the untold truth behind Prince Harry's most shocking security choice, a decision that would challenge everything the royal establishment believed about safety, protocol, and what it truly means to protect those born into Britain's most famous family. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Frogmore Cottage as Prince Harry stood at his study window, holding a letter that would change everything. The official Home Office letterhead felt heavy in his hands, heavier than any medal he had ever worn or any crown he would never inherit. The words were formal, bureaucratic, but their meaning was crystal clear: his taxpayer-funded police protection was being withdrawn permanently. It was March 2023, and Harry had been living this reality for 3 years since stepping back from his senior royal duties. But seeing it in black and white, with all the legal terminology and official stamps, made it feel final in a way that all the newspaper headlines and palace statements never had. He was truly on his own now, responsible for protecting not just himself, but his wife Meghan and their 2 young children, Archie and Lilibet. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was a man who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, who had walked through minefields and faced enemy fire, now being told he couldn't be trusted to receive the same protection that was automatically given to his cousins who had never seen combat. The security briefings he had attended as a working royal flashed through his memory: detailed threat assessments, intelligence reports about specific dangers to members of the royal family. He knew better than most what was out there in the shadows, waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity. Harry walked away from the window and sat down at his desk, surrounded by the chaos of his new life in California. Moving boxes still lined the walls of his temporary office, filled with remnants of his old existence: military commendations, photographs from royal engagements, letters from veterans thanking him for his service. Everything felt suspended between 2 worlds, the one he had left behind and the one he was still trying to build. His phone buzzed with a text from his private secretary. Another meeting with the security consultants was scheduled for that afternoon. Since losing his official protection, Harry had been through a parade of private security firms, each promising to provide the level of protection befitting a former senior royal. But every proposal felt the same: former military personnel, standardized protocols, armored vehicles, and a level of visibility that defeated the purpose of trying to live a more normal life. The truth was that traditional royal protection had become a prison he no longer wanted to inhabit. Years of living behind bulletproof glass, of having every movement planned and monitored, of being surrounded by men in dark suits who communicated through earpieces had taken its toll. The very system designed to protect him had become one of the things he most wanted to escape. But escape and abandonment were 2 very different things. Harry wasn't naive about the threats that came with his last name and his position in the line of succession. Even living in California, even having stepped back from official duties, he remained a target. The intelligence briefings he had received during his time as a working royal had made that abundantly clear. There were individuals and groups who saw any member of the royal family as a symbol worth targeting, regardless of their official status. The challenge was finding a middle ground between the suffocating protection of his former life and the dangerous exposure of having no protection at all. It was a problem that traditional security thinking seemed unable to solve. Every firm he consulted approached the challenge the same way: more guards, bigger cars, stricter protocols. They were trying to recreate the royal protection model on a private scale, but that was exactly what Harry was trying to escape. As he prepared for another security meeting, Harry found himself thinking about the conversations he had been having with Meghan about what their life in America could look like. They had made the difficult decision to leave royal life behind in search of something more authentic, more genuine. But, how could they build that authentic life if they had to live behind the same walls of protection that had defined his entire existence? The security consultant arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, another former Scotland Yard officer with an impressive resume and a traditional approach. He spread out organizational charts and protection protocols across Harry's desk, explaining how his team could provide comprehensive coverage that would rival anything the Metropolitan Police had ever provided. It was impressive, thorough, and exactly what Harry didn't want. "What if we approached this differently?" Harry interrupted, causing the consultant to pause mid-sentence. "What if instead of trying to recreate royal protection, we thought about what security could look like for someone who wants to live a more normal life?" The consultant looked puzzled. This wasn't how these conversations usually went. Members of the royal family, even former ones, typically wanted the highest level of protection available. They wanted to feel safe, and safety meant barriers, distance, and constant vigilance. "Your Royal Highness," the consultant began, using the title that Harry was still trying to leave behind, "I understand the desire for normalcy, but we can't compromise on safety. The threats against you and your family are real and serious. We need to treat this with the gravity it deserves." Harry leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. "I'm not suggesting we ignore the threats or take unnecessary risks. But I am questioning whether the traditional approach to royal protection is the only way to stay safe. What if there was a way to be secure without living in a bubble?" The consultant's expression suggested he thought Harry was being unrealistic, perhaps even reckless. It was a look Harry had seen before, from palace officials who couldn't understand why he would want to change systems that had worked for generations. But, working for whom? Harry wondered. Had the system really protected the royal family, or had it just created the illusion of protection while isolating them from the world they were supposed to serve? After the consultant left, Harry found himself walking through his neighborhood, something that would have been impossible during his life as a working royal. Here in Montecito, he could walk to the local coffee shop, browse in bookstores, have spontaneous conversations with neighbors. It was the kind of life he had dreamed about during those long, scheduled days of official engagements and rigid protocols. But, even here, even in this careful freedom, he was aware of the precautions he took without thinking about them. The routes he varied, the times he chose to go out, the way he scanned crowds and exits. His military training had given him skills that most people didn't have, and his royal upbringing had given him an awareness of threats that most people never had to develop. Maybe the solution wasn't about hiring the right security firm. Maybe it was about combining his unique background with a completely different approach to personal protection. That evening, over dinner with Meghan, Harry shared his growing frustration with the traditional security consultations. She listened carefully, asking questions that helped him clarify his own thinking. Meghan understood the desire for authenticity in a way that few people in his previous life had been able to comprehend. She had lived in both worlds, the normal world of her acting career and the extraordinary world of royal life, and she knew the cost of losing touch with ordinary human experience. "What if the answer isn't about hiring more security?" she suggested. "What if it's about being smarter about how we live our lives?" It was a simple question, but it opened up a completely different way of thinking about the problem. Instead of adding layers of protection, what if they focused on reducing their profile? Instead of surrounding themselves with obvious security, what if they found ways to blend in more effectively? Instead of following predictable patterns that made them easy targets, what if they embraced a level of spontaneity that would make them harder to track? Harry began researching unconventional approaches to personal security, studying how other high-profile individuals had managed to maintain both safety and authenticity. He read about business leaders who traveled without entourages, celebrities who had learned to navigate public spaces without drawing attention, and former military personnel who had transitioned from high-security environments to normal civilian life. The more he researched, the more he became convinced that there was another way. It would require letting go of some of the traditional markers of royal status, the visible security, the obvious protocols, the clear signs of importance and privilege. But it might also open up possibilities for the kind of life he and Meghan were trying to build. The challenge would be convincing everyone else, from his family to his advisors to the security professionals, that this unconventional approach wasn't just viable, but actually superior to the traditional model. He was asking them to trust in an idea that went against everything they had been trained to believe about protecting high-value targets. But Harry had learned something during his years in the military that many of his royal relatives had never experienced. Sometimes the most effective strategies were the ones that nobody saw coming. Sometimes the best way to stay safe was to stop looking like someone who needed protection. Sometimes the greatest security came not from building higher walls, but from learning how to walk through the world without needing them. As he sat in his study that night, looking out at the California landscape that was so different from the English countryside of his youth, Harry began to formulate a plan that would shock the royal establishment and challenge every assumption about how members of the royal family should be protected. It was a plan that would require courage, creativity, and a willingness to risk everything for the chance to live authentically. He was about to embark on a security experiment that would redefine what it meant to be safe in the modern world, and, in doing so, he would prove that sometimes the most radical choice is simply choosing to be yourself. 3 weeks after dismissing his fourth traditional security consultant, Harry found himself in an unlikely location for a royal security meeting. The small cafe in downtown Santa Barbara was buzzing with the usual lunchtime crowd, surfers grabbing quick bites between waves, business people conducting informal meetings, tourists planning their afternoon adventures. It was exactly the kind of place where a prince would never be expected to conduct serious business, which made it perfect for what Harry had in mind. Across from him sat a woman who looked nothing like any security professional he had ever worked with. Sarah Chen was in her early 30s, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, and, if you passed her on the street, you might guess she was a graduate student or a tech worker. She had no military background, no experience with royal protection, and no interest in following the established protocols that had governed royal security for decades. What Sarah did have was something far more valuable, a completely different way of thinking about personal protection in the modern world. She had built her reputation working with tech executives, artists, and activists who needed security but couldn't afford to lose their connection to normal life. Her approach was based on invisibility rather than intimidation, on blending in rather than standing out, on intelligence rather than overwhelming force. "Tell me about your normal day," Sarah said, pulling out a simple notebook instead of the elaborate briefing folders that other consultants had brought. "Not what your day used to look like, but what you actually want your life to be like." It was such a basic question, but no one had ever asked it before. Every other security professional had started with threat assessments and protection protocols. They wanted to know what Harry was afraid of, not what he was hoping for. Harry found himself describing the kind of life he and Meghan had dreamed about during those late-night conversations in their Kensington Palace apartment. He talked about wanting to take his children to the park without a security detail. About browsing in bookstores, having coffee with friends, attending school events without turning them into media circuses. About being able to help with charity work without needing advance teams and threat sweeps. Most security thinking starts with the assumption that you're trying to protect someone who can't change, Sarah explained as she took notes. But you're not a static target. You're a person who gets to make choices about how you live your life. Every choice you make changes your security profile, and if we make smart choices, we can actually make you safer while giving you more freedom. She explained how her approach worked with other clients. Instead of surrounding them with obvious protection, she helped them develop what she called lifestyle security, ways of living that reduced their visibility as targets while maintaining their ability to engage authentically with the world around them. For a tech CEO, this might mean varying his commute routes and timing so unpredictably that surveillance became nearly impossible. For an artist, it might mean using different entrances to venues and never following the same patterns twice. For an activist, it might mean communicating through encrypted channels and meeting in locations that couldn't be predicted or monitored. The key, Sarah continued, is understanding that security isn't just about protecting you from threats. It's about protecting your ability to be who you want to be. If your security makes it impossible to live authentically, then it's not really protecting what matters most. Harry felt something click into place. This was what had been missing from every other security consultation. Everyone else had been trying to protect Prince Harry, the royal figure who needed to be isolated and surrounded by barriers. But Sarah was talking about protecting Harry, the person who wanted to live a meaningful life with his family. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah outlined an approach to security that was unlike anything Harry had ever encountered. Instead of a visible security team, she proposed what she called environmental awareness, teaching Harry and Meghan to read situations and people in ways that would help them identify potential threats before they developed. Instead of armored vehicles and predetermined routes, she suggested varying their transportation methods and destinations in patterns that would make them unpredictable targets. Instead of avoiding public spaces, Sarah's approach involved learning how to navigate them safely by understanding crowd dynamics, exit strategies, and communication protocols. Instead of maintaining distance from normal life, her method focused on selective engagement, choosing when and where to be visible in ways that satisfied their public responsibilities without creating unnecessary exposure. "What about the children?" Harry asked. This was always the point where his anxiety peaked. He could accept risks for himself, but the thought of Archie and Lilibet being vulnerable was unbearable. Sarah's expression became more serious. "Children change everything, but they don't make this approach impossible. They just make it more important to be smart about it. We develop protocols that let them have normal childhood experiences while keeping them safe. We teach them age-appropriate awareness without scaring them. We create backup plans for every situation, but we don't let the planning take over their lives." She showed him case studies from her work with other families: a senator's children who attended regular public school with minimal security, a CEO's family who traveled internationally without the typical executive protection setup, and artists' teenagers who participated in normal social activities despite their parents' high profile. "The traditional model assumes that visibility equals safety," Sarah explained. "But, in the modern world, visibility often equals vulnerability. The most protected people are often the ones who don't look like they need protection." Harry thought about his own experience walking through Montecito. The times when he felt most secure were when he was just another resident running errands or walking his dog. It was when he looked and acted like Prince Harry that he felt most exposed and vulnerable. As their meeting continued, Sarah began outlining specific strategies that could work for Harry's unique situation. She proposed what she called contextual security, different approaches for different aspects of his life. When he was fulfilling public obligations or attending events related to his charitable work, they would use one set of protocols. When he was living his private life with his family, they would use completely different strategies. When he was traveling, especially to the UK, they would adapt their approach to the specific threats and opportunities of each trip. "The goal," she explained, "is to develop a security mindset rather than a security system. Systems are rigid and predictable. Mindsets are flexible and adaptive. Systems can be studied and defeated. Mindsets evolve and respond to changing circumstances." Harry found himself thinking about his military training and how it had emphasized adaptability and situational awareness over rigid protocols. The best soldiers weren't the ones who followed the manual perfectly. They were the ones who could assess situations quickly and respond appropriately to unexpected challenges. "How do we handle the media?" Harry asked. This was one of the biggest complicating factors in any security strategy. The constant attention from photographers and journalists created additional layers of risk and complexity. Sarah smiled for the first time during their meeting. "The media attention is actually an advantage if we handle it right. Photographers and journalists are predictable in their own ways. They follow patterns, they have preferred locations, they respond to certain triggers. If we understand their patterns, we can use them to our advantage." She explained how some of her clients had learned to manage media attention as part of their overall security strategy. By controlling when and where they were visible, they could satisfy the media's need for content while maintaining control over their own security. By understanding what made them interesting to photographers, they could choose when to be photographable and when to be invisible. "The key is recognizing that you're not just a target for potential threats," Sarah continued. "You're also a person with agency and intelligence who can make smart choices about how to engage with the world. Most security thinking treats the protectee as a passive object to be defended. But you're not passive. You're a former military officer with excellent situational awareness and decision-making skills. We can build on those strengths instead of treating you like someone who needs to be protected from his own choices." As their meeting wound down, Sarah presented Harry with a proposal that was radically different from anything he had considered before. Instead of hiring a traditional security team, she suggested a 6-month trial period where she would work with Harry and Meghan to develop personalized security skills and strategies. She would teach them advanced situational awareness, help them develop communication protocols, and work with them to create security habits that would become second nature. At the end of 6 months, she proposed, you'll have the skills and knowledge to make your own security decisions. You won't be dependent on a security team that might not understand your values or priorities. You'll be empowered to live the life you want while staying safe. It was exactly the opposite of what every other security consultant had offered. Instead of promising to take responsibility for his safety, Sarah was offering to give him the tools to take responsibility for himself. Harry left the cafe that afternoon with his mind racing. Sarah's proposal challenged every assumption he had held about security and protection. It offered the possibility of safety without imprisonment, protection without isolation, security without surrender of authenticity. But it also required him to take risks that no member of the royal family had ever taken before. He would be betting his family's safety on an approach that had never been tested with someone in his position. He would be choosing to rely on his own judgment and skills rather than the established systems that had protected royalty for generations. That evening, Harry shared Sarah's proposal with Meghan over dinner. As he described the conversation and outlined the possibilities, he could see her excitement building. This wasn't just about security, it was about reclaiming control over their own lives. It sounds scary, Meghan admitted, but not as scary as spending the rest of our lives trapped behind security barriers. They spent the night discussing the implications of Sarah's approach. Could they really keep their family safe without traditional security? Were they being naive about the risks they faced? Or were they being brave enough to find a better way? By morning, Harry had made his decision. He was going to take the biggest security risk of his life by choosing not to follow traditional security protocols. He was going to bet everything on the radical idea that the best way to protect his family was to empower them to protect themselves. The transformation began on a Tuesday morning at a farmer's market in Santa Barbara. To anyone watching, Harry and Meghan appeared to be just another couple browsing organic vegetables and artisanal breads. But their casual shopping trip was actually the first lesson in what Sarah called operational awareness training, learning to gather intelligence about their environment while appearing to do something completely ordinary. Notice the man in the blue jacket by the cheese stand, Sarah's voice came through the nearly invisible earpiece that Harry wore. He's been in your peripheral vision for the past 10 minutes, but he's not shopping. He's watching. Harry continued examining tomatoes while subtly observing the man Sarah had identified. She was right, his behavior was inconsistent with that of a typical market visitor. He wasn't engaging with vendors, wasn't making purchases, and his attention kept returning to Harry and Meghan despite his attempts to appear casual. Photographer or genuine threat? Meghan asked quietly, using the communication techniques Sarah had taught them. They had developed a system of subtle signals and coded language that allowed them to share information without alerting anyone to their vigilance. Unknown, Sarah responded. But we're about to find out. Harry walked toward the flower stand near the east exit. Meghan, continue shopping here for another 2 minutes, then take the route we discussed toward the parking area. If he follows Harry, we know he's specifically interested in one of you. If he stays put or leaves, we know his interest was more general. This was the kind of real-time intelligence gathering that traditional royal security never attempted. Instead of sweeping areas clear of potential threats, Sarah's approach involved understanding and managing those threats in real time. It required Harry and Meghan to become active participants in their own security rather than passive recipients of protection. As Harry moved toward the flowers, he practiced the subtle observation technique Sarah had been teaching him. He used reflective surfaces to monitor the man's movement, employed what Sarah called casual scanning to assess exit routes and potential cover, and maintained awareness of crowd density and movement patterns. To any observer, he looked like someone leisurely shopping for flowers. In reality, he was conducting a sophisticated threat assessment. The man in the blue jacket followed Harry, confirming Sarah's suspicion that he was specifically interested in the prince. But his movement patterns suggested he was a photographer rather than someone with more sinister intentions. His positioning was optimal for pictures but poor for any kind of physical approach. His equipment, while concealed, created telltale bulges in his jacket that Harry had learned to recognize. Paparazzi, Harry confirmed through their communication system. Should we abort? Negative, Sarah responded. This is perfect training. Let's practice photographer management. Over the next 20 minutes, Harry and Meghan implemented what Sarah called narrative control, managing their interaction with the photographer in a way that satisfied his professional needs while maintaining their own security and dignity. Instead of trying to avoid him completely, they gave him a few clear shots that told the story he wanted to sell while preventing him from getting intrusive or compromising photos. They chose their positioning carefully, ensuring that any photos would show them in positive circumstances while preventing shots that might reveal their security procedures or personal information. They controlled the interaction by being aware of what story the photos would tell and making choices that supported the narrative they wanted to project. By working with the photographer's needs instead of against them, Sarah explained later, we actually gained more control over the situation than if we had tried to avoid him completely. This lesson in photographer management was just one component of the comprehensive training program Sarah had designed for Harry and Meghan. Over the following weeks, they learned skills that traditional royal protection had never taught them because it had never expected them to be responsible for their own security. They studied what Sarah called urban camouflage ways of moving through public spaces that reduced their visibility as high-value targets. This didn't mean disguises or elaborate deceptions. Instead, it involved understanding how to adjust their body language, clothing choices, and behavior patterns to blend more effectively into different environments. When attending their son Archie's school events, for example, they learned to dress and act in ways that made them appear to be typical parents rather than celebrities. This involved studying the other parents, understanding the social dynamics of the school community, and making choices about when to engage and when to maintain distance. They practiced what Sarah called situational flexibility, the ability to adapt their security posture to different circumstances. At a casual neighborhood gathering, their approach was completely different from their strategy at a formal charitable event, which was different again from their protocol when traveling to London. The training extended to practical skills that most people never need to develop. They learned advanced driving techniques that would allow them to safely exit dangerous situations without relying on a professional driver. They studied communication security, understanding how their phones and devices could be tracked or monitored and developing protocols to protect their privacy without becoming paranoid. Harry found that his military background gave him advantages in this training that most civilians wouldn't have. His combat experience had already taught him situational awareness and threat assessment. His leadership training had given him the ability to make quick decisions under pressure. His understanding of operational security translated directly to the civilian protection strategies Sarah was teaching. But, for Meghan, the learning curve was steeper. She had to develop new instincts and awareness that hadn't been necessary during her acting career or even during their time as working royals, when professional security had handled these concerns. Sarah tailored the training to Meghan's learning style and experience, helping her understand how her natural observational skills and emotional intelligence could be redirected toward security awareness. One of the most challenging aspects of the training involved preparing for travel, especially trips to the United Kingdom where the threat level was higher and the media attention more intense. Sarah worked with them to develop what she called journey security protocols that began with trip planning and continued through every aspect of their travel experience. Traditional royal travel is incredibly predictable, Sarah explained during one of their planning sessions. The same airports, the same routes, the same hotels, the same security protocols. Predictability is the enemy of security. We're going to make you unpredictable. They learned to vary their transportation methods in ways that made surveillance difficult. Sometimes they flew commercial, sometimes private, sometimes they combined different modes of transportation to create confusion about their actual travel plans. They studied how to use decoy strategies, allowing false information about their movements to circulate while following completely different routes. They practiced what Sarah called destination security, understanding how to assess and managed the security challenges of any location they visited. This involved research techniques for understanding local threat levels, communication protocols for staying in touch with their support network, and adaptation strategies for adjusting their security approach to different cultural and legal environments. The most intensive training focused on family security, protecting Archie and Lilibet while allowing them to have normal childhood experiences. This required a completely different mindset from traditional royal security, which typically involved keeping royal children in highly controlled environments with obvious protection. Sarah helped them develop age-appropriate awareness training for their children, teaching them basic safety concepts without creating anxiety or paranoia. They learned how to choose safe environments for family activities, how to communicate with schools and other institutions about their security needs, and how to maintain their children's privacy while living in the public eye. They practiced emergency protocols that could be implemented quickly and naturally without traumatizing the children or drawing unwanted attention. These scenarios ranged from dealing with aggressive photographers to managing more serious security threats, all while maintaining the appearance of a normal family going about their daily activities. Perhaps the most valuable aspect of the training was learning to trust their own judgment. Traditional royal security had conditioned Harry to defer to professionals on all security matters. Sarah's approach required him to develop confidence in his own ability to assess situations and make protective decisions for his family. Security isn't something that's done to you or for you, Sarah reminded them regularly. It's something you do for yourself. The goal is to give you the knowledge and skills to make good decisions, not to make decisions for you. After 3 months of intensive training, Harry and Meghan had developed security capabilities that few people outside of law enforcement or intelligence services ever acquire. They could conduct surveillance detection, assess threat levels, manage media attention, communicate securely, travel safely, and protect their children, all while maintaining the appearance of living normal lives. But the real test was still coming. They were planning their first trip to London since beginning the training, and it would require them to implement everything they had learned in the most challenging environment possible, returning to the place where Harry had grown up under traditional royal protection, where every movement would be scrutinized, and where the stakes of getting it wrong were highest. The trip would prove whether Sarah's radical approach to security could work for someone with Harry's profile and responsibilities. It would test whether they could maintain their safety while preserving their authenticity, whether they could protect their family while staying connected to the causes they cared about. As they prepared for the journey, Harry reflected on how much had changed since that morning when he had received the letter withdrawing his official protection. What had seemed like a loss of safety had become an opportunity to gain something far more valuable, the ability to take responsibility for his own security and, in doing so, to reclaim control over his own life. The wheels of the commercial flight touched down at Heathrow Terminal 5 on a grey October morning, and Harry felt his stomach tighten with a familiar anxiety that had nothing to do with flying. This was his first return to London since fully implementing Sarah's security protocols, and everything about the trip would test whether their unconventional approach could work in the most challenging environment possible. Unlike his previous visits as a working royal, there were no police escorts waiting on the tarmac, no predetermined secure routes, no advance teams clearing his path. Instead, Harry and Meghan emerged from the aircraft looking like any other passengers, carrying their own bags and following the normal immigration procedures that Harry had never experienced before. "Remember, you're just another family visiting London," Sarah's voice came through their earpieces as they walked through the terminal. "Your advantage is that nobody expects you to be traveling this way." The first test came immediately. A photographer who had been waiting at the arrivals area spotted them despite their efforts to blend in. But, instead of the typical royal response rushing toward waiting cars while security held back the media, Harry and Meghan implemented their photographer management training. They acknowledged the photographer with brief smiles, allowing him to capture a few shots that told the story he needed while continuing to move naturally through the terminal. Meghan engaged briefly with a young fan who approached them, creating a positive interaction that the photographer could document while Harry maintained subtle awareness of their environment and exit strategies. "Beautiful work," Sarah commented privately. "You just gave them exactly what they wanted while maintaining complete control over the interaction." Their transportation from the airport represented a radical departure from royal travel protocols. Instead of the traditional royal convoy, they had arranged for a simple private car service, the kind used by business executives rather than royalty. The vehicle was comfortable but not ostentatious, secure but not obviously armored, professional but not intimidating. Harry found himself in the strange position of giving directions to the driver, something he had never done during his royal life when every journey was planned and executed by others. They took surface streets rather than highways, varying their route in the unpredictable patterns Sarah had taught them, turning the journey into an intelligence-gathering exercise about current conditions in London. "Traffic patterns have changed since you lived here," Meghan observed, using their coded communication to share information about their environment. "More congestion around the financial district, different security measures near government buildings." This kind of environmental intelligence gathering was impossible when traveling with traditional royal protection because the security team's priority was moving quickly and efficiently rather than understanding local conditions. But Sarah's approach treated every journey as an opportunity to better understand the security landscape. Their accommodation arrangements reflected the same unconventional thinking. Instead of staying at a traditional royal residence or luxury hotel with established royal protection protocols, they had chosen a boutique hotel in Kensington that catered to discerning business travelers rather than celebrities. The location offered multiple exit routes, excellent views of surrounding streets, and staff who were professional but not overwhelmed by royal visitors. Harry registered under a name that was technically accurate but unlikely to attract attention, using identification that was legal but not obviously royal. Their room selection had been based on security considerations rather than luxury: upper floor for better visibility and escape options, corner location to limit approaches, proximity to both elevators and stairwells for flexible exit strategies. The real test began the next morning when they attended a charity event that Harry had committed to supporting. This was exactly the kind of public appearance that traditional royal security would have required extensive advance planning, threat assessments, and coordination with local police. Sarah's approach was completely different. Instead of arriving with obvious security, Harry and Meghan appeared at the venue looking like any other supporters of the charity. They had studied the event program, understood the venue layout, and identified the key people they needed to interact with, but they had done so without the elaborate advance work that typically preceded royal appearances. "The key," Sarah had explained during their planning, "is to be prepared without being obvious about your preparation." They entered through the same entrance as other guests rather than a special royal entrance. They mingled naturally with other attendees rather than being kept in a separate area. They participated in the event programming rather than following a predetermined schedule that isolated them from genuine interactions. But, beneath the appearance of casual attendance, they were implementing sophisticated security protocols. They maintained constant awareness of crowd dynamics, identified potential exit strategies, monitored the behavior of other guests, and communicated continuously through their nearly invisible earpiece system. When photographers began taking pictures, Harry and Meghan positioned themselves strategically to control what images could be captured while ensuring their movements didn't reveal their security procedures. When well-meaning guests approached for conversations, they engaged warmly while subtly managing the interactions to prevent security compromises. The most challenging moment came when a man in the crowd began behaving erratically, moving aggressively toward Harry and speaking loudly about royal privilege and inequality. Traditional royal security would have immediately intervened, creating a scene and potentially escalating the situation. Sarah's protocols were different. "Assess but don't react," her voice came through their earpieces. "Let's see what we're dealing with before we respond." Harry used his situational awareness training to evaluate the man's behavior and intentions. His body language suggested he was angry and possibly intoxicated, but not necessarily dangerous. His words were politically motivated rather than personally threatening. His movement patterns suggested he wanted attention more than confrontation. Instead of being removed by security, Harry chose to briefly acknowledge the man's concerns while moving naturally away from him. The interaction diffused the tension without creating a dramatic scene that would have dominated news coverage of the charity event. "Excellent judgment," Sarah commented afterward. "You turned a potential security incident into a demonstration of your ability to engage authentically with people who disagree with you." The success of the charity event gave Harry and Meghan confidence to attempt something that would have been impossible under traditional royal security protocols: an unannounced visit to a veterans support center that Harry had worked with during his military service. They arrived without advance notice, without security sweeps, without coordination with local authorities. To the staff and veterans present, they appeared as unexpected but welcome visitors rather than royal dignitaries requiring special protocols. Harry was able to have the kind of authentic conversations with veterans that had made his military charity work meaningful. He listened to their stories, shared his own experiences, and discussed challenges facing the veteran community, all without the barriers that formal royal visits typically created between him and the people he was trying to serve. "This is what I've been missing," Harry confided to Meghan afterward. "The ability to actually connect with people instead of just making official appearances." Their time in London also included private meetings with old friends, something that traditional royal security made extremely difficult because of the elaborate protocols required for anyone meeting with protected royals. Sarah's approach allowed for spontaneous social interactions that felt normal rather than like state visits. They had dinner with former military colleagues at a local pub, attended a friend's birthday party at a private home, and even managed to visit some of Harry's favorite childhood locations without turning these personal moments into public spectacles. But perhaps the most significant test came when they brought Archie and Lilibet to visit with their cousins, Harry's brother's children. This was the kind of family interaction that previous security protocols had made awkward and artificial because of the complex coordination required between different protection details. Under Sarah's protocols, the visit felt like what it was supposed to be: cousins playing together while their parents caught up. The children weren't surrounded by obvious security, weren't restricted to specially prepared areas, and weren't subjected to the kind of artificial environment that traditional royal security created around family gatherings. Harry watched his children playing with their cousins and realized that this was the first time they had experienced normal family interactions in the UK. Previous visits had been so heavily managed by security protocols that genuine relationships had been difficult to maintain. Throughout their London visit, Harry and Meghan implemented different security protocols for different activities. Formal public engagements required one approach, private social visits used another, family time employed a third strategy. This flexibility was impossible under traditional royal security, which applied the same high-level protocols to every situation regardless of actual risk levels. After a week in London, they had successfully navigated every security challenge they encountered without compromising their safety or their authenticity. They had attended public events, conducted private meetings, maintained family relationships, and supported charitable causes, all while staying secure through intelligence rather than intimidation, preparation rather than barriers. The trip proved that Sarah's approach could work even in the most challenging circumstances. But it also revealed something else: the response from royal commentators and security experts who learned about their unconventional methods. As news of their successful visit spread, along with details about their innovative security approach, reactions ranged from fascination to shock to outright criticism. Some praised their courage and creativity. Others questioned whether they had taken unacceptable risks. Many simply couldn't understand how they had managed to stay safe without following established royal protection protocols. The debate that followed would challenge fundamental assumptions about royal security and raise questions that the establishment had never been forced to consider. Was traditional royal protection actually the safest approach, or just the most familiar one? Could members of the royal family be more secure by being less obviously protected? And what did it mean for the future of royal security if Harry and Meghan had proven that there was a better way? The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in December, 6 months after Harry and Meghan had successfully completed their London visit using Sarah's unconventional security protocols. The caller's identity was shocking enough, a senior aide from Buckingham Palace, but the purpose of the call was even more surprising. "His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales would like to meet with you," the aide said carefully, using the formal tone that Harry remembered from his royal life but hadn't heard directed toward him in years. "He's interested in discussing your recent security arrangements." Harry set down his coffee and stared out at the California morning, processing this unexpected development. His brother William, now heir to the throne, was reaching out about security matters. This wasn't a personal family call, those still happened occasionally, though rarely. This was an official inquiry from the future king about Harry's radical departure from royal protection protocols. "What kind of meeting?" Harry asked, though he suspected he already knew. Word had inevitably leaked about their successful London visit and the methods they had used to stay safe while maintaining their authenticity. The story had been covered extensively in both traditional media and security industry publications, generating intense debate about the future of royal protection. "A private consultation," the aide replied. "Completely confidential. His Royal Highness would like to understand your approach and discuss its potential applications for working members of the royal family." The irony was breathtaking. 6 months earlier, Harry's decision to abandon traditional royal security had been viewed as reckless and potentially dangerous. Now, the heir to the throne was asking for advice about those same innovations. After hanging up, Harry immediately called Sarah to discuss this unexpected development. Her response was characteristically thoughtful and strategic. "This isn't just about curiosity," she pointed out. "If William is asking questions about your security methods, it means the traditional approach is facing challenges that they can't solve using conventional thinking." She was right, and Harry knew it. The royal protection system had been designed for a different era, when royalty lived more isolated lives and public engagement followed predictable patterns. The modern royal family needed to be more accessible, more authentic, more connected to ordinary life, but traditional security protocols made that increasingly difficult. Harry agreed to the meeting, which was arranged for the following week at a private location in Los Angeles. William would be traveling to California for environmental initiatives, providing cover for what would otherwise be a highly unusual consultation. When the brothers met at a discreet Beverly Hills hotel suite, Harry was struck by how different William looked from their last encounter. The future king appeared tired and frustrated in a way that Harry recognized from his own struggles with royal life. The burden of balancing security requirements with authentic public engagement was taking its toll. "I need to understand what you've done," William said without preamble. "How you've managed to maintain security while living more normally. The traditional approach isn't working anymore." Harry spent the next 2 hours explaining Sarah's philosophy and methods, describing the training he and Meghan had undergone, and sharing examples from their successful implementation of lifestyle security. William listened intently, occasionally asking detailed questions about specific scenarios and protocols. "The children's school events are the worst," William admitted during a break in their discussion. "George wants to attend regular activities, but we have to turn everything into a security operation. Kate feels like we're isolating our children from normal childhood experiences, but the protection officers insist on full protocols for any public appearance." Harry recognized the frustration immediately. It was the same conflict he had faced before Sarah showed him there was another way. "What if there was a middle ground?" Harry suggested. "What if you could maintain appropriate security while allowing more authentic engagement?" William was skeptical but interested. The conversation continued for another hour, with Harry explaining how Sarah's approach could be adapted for working royals who had different constraints and obligations than he and Meghan faced. The meeting concluded with William asking Harry to arrange a consultation with Sarah herself. Within a week, the three of them were meeting at the same discreet location, with Sarah explaining her philosophy directly to the future king. "Traditional royal security assumes that visibility equals vulnerability," Sarah told William, using the same explanation she had given Harry months earlier. "But, in many situations, the opposite is true. The most secure approach is often the one that doesn't look like security." She outlined how her methods could be adapted for working royals without compromising their obligations or safety. The key was developing what she called contextual protocols, different security approaches for different types of engagements, rather than applying the same heavy protection to every situation. For low-risk public engagements, working royals could use minimal visible security while employing sophisticated situational awareness and environmental intelligence. For medium-risk events, they could combine reduced visible protection with enhanced surveillance detection and emergency response capabilities. For high-risk situations, they would maintain traditional security protocols but with improved integration between protection teams and principals. William was particularly interested in Sarah's approach to family security, protecting royal children while allowing them normal developmental experiences. The traditional model treated royal children as potential targets who needed constant protection. Sarah's approach focused on selective protection that matched actual risk levels rather than theoretical maximum threats. Your children can have normal school experiences, Sarah explained, if we're smart about which schools they attend, how they travel there, and what protocols we implement for different activities. The goal is to make smart choices that reduce risk without eliminating normal childhood altogether. 3 months later, Harry received another unexpected call, this time from his father's private secretary. King Charles wanted to meet about security innovations for the broader royal family. The success of William's initial consultation with Sarah had apparently convinced senior palace officials that these unconventional approaches deserved serious consideration. The meeting with Charles took place during Harry's next visit to London, in the same palace study where Harry had attended security briefings as a working royal. But this conversation was completely different from those formal threat assessments and protocol reviews. "I'm told you found ways to be secure without being imprisoned," Charles said with characteristic directness. "If that's true, we need to understand how it works for the monarchy as an institution." Harry explained that Sarah's approach wasn't just about personal security, it was about institutional evolution. The monarchy needed to adapt to modern expectations about accessibility and authenticity, but traditional security protocols made that adaptation difficult or impossible. What if royal engagements could feel more genuine because the security was less obvious? Harry suggested. What if royal family members could have more authentic relationships because the protection protocols didn't create barriers between them and normal human interaction? Charles listened carefully, asking questions about implementation, costs, and risks. He was particularly interested in how these approaches might affect the monarchy's public perception and its ability to fulfill its constitutional role in modern society. The conversation led to something unprecedented, a formal review of royal protection protocols by a team that included both traditional security experts and Sarah's unconventional approaches. The review would examine every aspect of how the royal family was protected, from daily security to major state occasions. Harry found himself in the strange position of consulting on the evolution of the very system he had chosen to leave. But he recognized the importance of helping his family find better ways to balance security with authenticity, protection with accessibility. The review process took 6 months and involved analyzing everything from routine royal engagements to international state visits. Sarah worked with palace security teams to identify opportunities for innovation without compromising safety standards. The results were revolutionary, though the changes were implemented gradually and discreetly. Working royals began using more flexible security protocols that matched actual threat levels rather than applying maximum protection to every situation. Royal children started attending more normal school activities with adapted rather than overwhelming security. Royal family members began traveling in ways that were secure but less obviously protected. The success of these innovations gradually became apparent in public perception surveys and media coverage. Royal engagements began feeling more authentic and accessible. Royal family members appeared more relaxed and genuine in their public interactions. The monarchy's approval ratings improved as people felt more connected to royals who seemed less isolated behind security barriers. But perhaps the most significant change was personal rather than public. Harry's relationship with his family began to improve as they implemented security approaches that allowed for more normal family interactions. The artificial barriers that traditional security had created between family members started to dissolve. During their next family gathering, Harry watched his children playing naturally with their cousins while the adults had genuine conversations without the awkward formality that heavy security protocols had previously imposed. It felt like the first real family time they had shared in years. "You've given us something we didn't know we had lost," William told Harry privately during that visit. "The ability to be a normal family sometimes, even while fulfilling our public roles." Looking back on the journey from that morning when he received the letter withdrawing his protection to this moment of family reconciliation and institutional innovation, Harry realized that losing his official security had been the beginning of gaining something far more valuable. He had discovered that true security came not from barriers and protocols, but from intelligence, preparation, and the courage to live authentically while staying safe. Sarah's unconventional approach had not only protected Harry and his family, it had helped revolutionize how the entire royal family thought about the relationship between security and authenticity. The prince who had been criticized for abandoning traditional protection had instead shown everyone a better way forward. The story of Harry's security choice had become more than personal rebellion. It had become a blueprint for how ancient institutions could adapt to modern realities without losing their essential purpose. And, in the end, the most shocking thing about Prince Harry's unexpected security choice wasn't that he had taken such unprecedented risks, it was that he had proven those risks were actually safer than the traditional approach everyone had assumed was unquestionable.